Hello, and welcome to Trip the Beltway Fantastic. Glad to be back after a little break, and while my timelines are exploding with foreign policy and national security news from all corners, this week Secretary of State Pete Hegseth called every single admiral and general to Virginia, where the Pentagon is located, for a meeting. It turned out to be a pair of speeches from Hegseth and President Trump about what they are calling the new American military era. In his own words, Hegseth said, quote, "No more politically correct and overbearing rules of engagement, just common sense, maximum lethality, and authority for warfighters. We are warriors," he went on. "We are purpose-built, not for fair weather, blue skies, or calm seas. We're built to load up in the back of helicopters, 5 tons of zodiacs in the dead of night, in fair weather or foul, to go to dangerous places to find those who would do our nation harm and deliver justice on behalf of the American people in close and brutal combat if necessary. You are different. We fight not because we hate, but what's in front of us. We fight because we love what's behind us. Out are rules of engagement that restrict the necessary force, DEI, and fat generals walking the halls of the Pentagon. In is a warrior ethos that only focuses on the M, which he referred to as military, and builds pride in that ethos. Out is the word defense. In is killing and breaking things. That's a direct quote. Trump followed this with a much less cogent speech, but at one point said he wanted to make American cities National Guard training grounds and talked about the enemy within. Given that he has or is threatening to send troops to a number of U.S. cities over crime and anti-ICE rioting, this rioting in air quotes, this sparked another wave of panic in the press. This also comes as the president and his administration appears to be leaning into a renewed drug war, particularly military action against Venezuela and proposals for a new authorization for military force targeting narco terrorists that could, in practice, see U.S. military force used in upwards of 60 countries, if not the homeland itself. And according to the New York Times this week, not only are there Marco Rubio efforts within the administration to engage in a regime change operation in Venezuela, but on Thursday, it reported that the administration has decided that the U.S. is engaged in a formal, quote, armed conflict with drug cartels that his team has already labeled terrorist organizations, and that suspected smugglers for such groups are, quote, unlawful combatants. This was conveyed by the administration in a confidential notice to Congress this week. There have been plenty of calls for military reform, even shaving the top officer ranks and instituting radical reforms to the culture of the institution, which we know has become sclerotic in its thinking, detached from American life and people, and unaccountable for its failures and corruptions. But is what Trump doing right now the best way to go about it? I put this question to 2 veterans I most respect. Brandon Buck is a scholar and fellow at the Cato Institute and an Afghanistan veteran, and Dan McKnight is the founder and director of Bring Our Troops Home and also a veteran of the Afghanistan war. So thank you both for joining me today.
Thank you, Kelly. Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
So I'm going to ask you, and I honestly don't know what each of you thought or think about the Hegseth speech. I outlined a few of the things that he said in it, and I feel like basically they convey the thrust of his remarks on Tuesday, which ran, I think, about, I don't want to say 25, 30 minutes. So I'm genuinely curious, as veterans and observers of American media or military, and both of you are very interested in reforming the military, what you thought of his speech. I'll start with you, Dan.
No, our organization absolutely supports what Secretary Hegseth said about restoring discipline and standards. A military's job is simple. It's to fight and win America's wars. But a professional warrior class, while it's good for America, it's only good if Congress actually demonstrates the restraints that it's and only uses that lethal military in wars that they're actually declaring. The danger that we see is turning this more lethal expeditionary force into an empire occupying force. And the cure is combining constitutional limits with this improvement in the warrior standards. So the founders gave civilian control of the military for a reason, right? They wanted our civilian representation in Congress to exercise restraint, to keep those young 18-year-old males full of testosterone from marching off into every endeavor and fight that they wanted to get into. But while the military builds this professional warrior ethos of discipline and lethality, the restraint from Congress makes the 1-2 punch that makes America a republic. And when Congress abdicates its duty, the balance is lost and we become an empire. And we are on the verge of that right now.
Brandon?
Yeah, so I would just like to echo, like anything that gets standards up, I think is a good thing. I mean, there are physical fitness problems in the military, and there are certainly problems with standards. And frankly, anything that downsizes the military is fine by me. But I do worry that this notion, that this speech and the sentiments behind it are really like this effort to retcon a reason why we lost the war on terror, or at least lost the war in Afghanistan. This notion that the military was being withheld overly due to rules of engagement, or some kind of weakness, up in the higher echelons. And I served, and yes, at times, rules of engagement were quite constraining, but nevertheless, we're not having this deeper conversation about why we were there to begin with. Like, what was the purpose? Was it nation building? Was it to eliminate Al-Qaeda? And I worry that this notion, that this speech and the sentiments behind it are being used to mask a more substantive debate about what the military is for. And furthermore, I also feel like this, plus with the remilitarizing of the war on drugs, and we can get to more on that in a second. This is, for many people on the MAGA right, what Ukraine was for a lot of liberals, right? This is the way that we can get our groove back. We had this sour experience in the Middle East, but now we're gonna do this exercise, be it at home or in the near abroad, and therefore we will get back to our kind of fighting shape and fighting spirit.
Yeah, I would like to get to more of that in a second, but just staying with the Hegseth speech for a moment, Dan, it really resonates with me what Brandon said about, I don't know if you'd call it masking or just avoiding, the elephant in the room in terms of like why we lost these wars, these 20-year wars. And I feel like Hegseth would like to convey the message that it was all because we had terrible rules of engagement that restricted our warfighters, our soldiers, Marines from getting the job done. And can you address that for a second? Because I know you've been working in this space for a very long time. And I think it is frustrating to folks who have been advocating for reform and to learn the lessons of our GWOT wars, to see a moment like this or an opportunity like this seemingly missed.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think Brandon nailed it on the head that what Pete and President Trump, I think, did with these speeches is to pluck that low-hanging fruit. It's the red meat for their base. Hey, we're going to take care of all the social contagions, the DEI and all those things, very visibly, and do that without doing the hard thing, which is returning the power to send American sons and daughters into war back to where it belongs, in Congress. And had we had a proper declaration of war before we went into Afghanistan, or called for a declaration of war, I don't know that we would have gone. If Congress would have actually had a debate and discuss, are we going into into an independent nation to fight citizens from another nation that didn't attack us and didn't participate in the war, the attack on 9/11, which is what we did. We went into Afghanistan to fight Yemenis and Saudis. It's just crazy. So that war may not have happened. And if it did, we would have had 435 members of Congress with their name on the line who would then be held accountable for the successes of that mission in that war in Afghanistan. And also, we wouldn't have been able to pivot and go into George W. Bush's war of revenge in Iraq. We wouldn't have been able to be lied into that as well. And if I like to bring back the attention, one member of Congress tried to propose a declaration of war prior to Iraq. One, it was Congressman Ron Paul, and they laughed him out of the Foreign Relations Committee, saying we just don't do that anymore. And so Congress has abdicated their responsibility. They have to own a lion's share of the failures of American foreign policy. The executive branch has to own a share. Putting the blame on the military because we had bad rules of engagement or fat generals or soldiers running around with beards is masking the problem and is taking the responsibility away from those that actually should own it. The American people, through our Constitution, we gave our authority to commit our nation to war. We gave that authority to Congress. Congress can't give that authority away to anybody else. It's not theirs to give away. And until we get that back in line, it won't matter if we have the most lethal force or the fattest force on earth. We're going to be in a mess all over the world.
Yeah, Brandon, I mean, I spent a lot of time in the last, I don't know how many years, let's just say 10 years, talking to people like yourself, folks like Doug McGregor and others who have served in the military, have been really advocating for a radical reform within the military. And it's not just about the woke and getting rid of the social engineering. That, you know, I fully understand where that sentiment is coming from, but it also includes things like the promotion system and the types of people who are rising through the ranks, and whether or not we've lost the ability to critically think and strategize because we're promoting people who are just yes men, and they're politically astute and savvy, people like David Petraeus, who know how to work the media and work the angles, but really is not what you would think as a strategic military thinker. And, you know, growing the ranks to 800 generals and admirals, but not really finding a real signature thinker or strategic mind among any of them. That seems like really hard work to do. Are you surprised that, given the opportunity to actually go in and start rolling up the sleeves and doing the hard work to reform the military in transformational ways, is not being seized right now? Because you do have an administration that's willing to fire people, but yet we got Hegseth up there he was, you know, like you said, talking about beards and fatness and DEI, but not really much deeper than a teaspoon.
Yeah, well, you know, for a long time, the military has had a really bad retention problem. We hear about the recruiting problem, but they've also had just as much of a difficulty in keeping people in the military. And I think there are a lot of reasons for that. Part of it is kind of DEI madness. Some of it is the kind of bureaucracy. You know, part of it is the up and out system in the officer corps. I think it's like 2 promotions, and if you don't get promoted, then you're out. I mean, that's a big way to lose a lot of human capital that might be good at jobs that are kind of lower down the sort of the hierarchy tier. And you know, once you get up higher in the chain, particularly once you're knocking on the door for being a flag officer, it is a political position, and that there is a sorting there. I mean, we saw this throughout the war on terror. So, you know, people who told the hard truth about what was going on, you know, those narratives did not make it up, you know, past the sort of CENTCOM brass and into the White House. So there are, you know, and I think part of this is just the U.S. government has far too many places to put people. I mean, like they have to lower the standards in order to get the bodies to keep troops and bases all over the world. And then if we had a much more modest foreign policy based on, I don't know, defending the United States homeland, we could be much more discriminating. And I mean that word positively about who we have in the military, and we wouldn't have to cut corners and lower standards to get people in the door and then to keep them there.
Yeah, do you agree with that, Dan?
100%. You know, the problem in the officer corps is in order to achieve that flag officer rank, you have to be grooming, and I use that word properly here, your yes men or yes women who are coming in your wake. And what happens is when you become a flag officer and you get promoted, it's your duty and responsibility to put your clone in your spot that you just vacated. And so we see these officers that when they get to that flag rank, they are just carbon copy of the one that came before. And the one thing that Pete said that I really, truly agreed with is that they are going to review the process of a one-time discretion or a mistake or a bad judgment or questioning authority. should not limit an officer from moving up in the rank. They're going to have forgiveness for common sense mistakes. That gives the lower level officers, lieutenant colonel and below, the discretion to challenge the decisions made by their leaders, to challenge the information their leaders are pushing up the chain of command. I can't tell you how many times we sat in battle update briefs in Afghanistan reporting the realities on the ground, only to hear that information was being whitewashed and filtered as soon as it left the room. Every captain, every major, every lieutenant colonel had to pass up a positive report that we are succeeding. Otherwise, it would have cost them their job, their career, their promotion. And that's one part of Pete's speech that really resonated with me and I found to be impactful and probably maybe the best part of his new policy is that will give those lower officer ranks the opportunity to challenge the authority of their leaders.
Yeah, I agree, and I'm sorry that I missed that key part of his speech. That reminds me of Michael. Oh God, well, I can't remember his name all of a sudden, but the author now not with us anymore, who wrote the Operators about Stanley McChrystal and his time reporting in Afghanistan, and I'll remember in a second. But one of the revelations from his reporting was just that there was one reality on the ground in Afghanistan, and then there was the other reality, what was being reported to members of Congress in briefings in terms of the progress that both United States and Afghan military soldiers were making on the ground. And it was like night and day. And I get your point, Brandon, when you talk about the mistakes that had been made by our civilian masters during the war and the policies. But I do remember the real politicization of the general class during the Afghan and Iraq wars, when they did go to Congress and they pushed for more troops and they pushed for more time, and they did whitewash a lot of the realities that were going on the ground there. Daniel Davis wrote about this at the risk of his own career when he came back from Afghanistan, and he wrote an entire brief for Congress basically saying, listen, the generals are lying to you. And then when Congress didn't do anything, he wrote publicly for, I believe it was Small Wars or Armed Forces Journal. But, I think both sides are to blame. And it seems like the only blaming that's going on is that the Biden administration and the generals active during the time of the withdrawal botched everything. And so everything's focused on the withdrawal and not the fact that we were in this war for 20 years, much of it because the generals were saying victory was right around the corner. So that's very frustrating. Before we leave this part of the interview, I was wondering what you had thought about this insistence by Hegseth that he didn't want the military to be politicized, but yet there was a very political bent or shading or hue to the entire spectacle of these speeches, particularly when Trump gets on the stage and he basically says, we're all on the same team here and those Democrats are terrible. Are you feeling some of the concern that you hear mostly from the left and the left press that the Trump administration is doing the opposite of what it says, and it is really politicizing the U.S. military, or is this business as usual? And I'll throw this to Brandon.
Oh, I don't know. I mean, it's it's tough to say because, what do we mean by political? Do we mean like partisan, or because I don't know. I'd really have to think on that. Like what I'm concerned is that when they say they want to depoliticize the military, they want to prime the officer corps to do things that are constitutionally questionable. Let's just put it that way. Like certain airstrikes in the Caribbean. I mean, if an officer was to say, "Hey, this is illegal. I can't do this," they could say, "Oh, Is that officer acting politically because he is countermanding an officer that is a order that might or might not be lawful? That is certainly open to interpretation. I would say no, but I mean, even the phrase "political" is a political term, right? We try to pretend as if people are acting apolitically when in fact they're just conserving their own sides, particularly foreign policy motives. So.
That's a good point, Brandon. And I had a similar question myself, because I feel like Hegseth was accused of being too political. But when I looked at his and listened to his speech, I do think he had a specific ideological point to make. And that is like, we are going to strip the military of all this DEI, all of this left woke social engineering that had taken over the institution over the last 30 years, and we're going to strip it down to be the warrior ethos that we want it to be, which is more, it's ideological, but it doesn't seem to me that it was particularly partisan. I think when Trump gets on, he ends up rambling and mixing up his Democratic enemies, tariffs, talking about his signature, how great it was. And he goes in and out of partisan politics in his own rhetoric, and that and to an audience that's trying so hard not to look and show any emotion on their faces, because they know at any moment their camera's going to be on. I think there are two distinct issues here. Did you see it that way, Dan?
Yeah, I agree. I thought that the presentation that Pete put on was absent of politics, partisan politics. Right. It was chock full of politics, but it was absent of partisan politics. And I think the distinction we're trying to make here is that, do we want our military to be involved in partisan politics, or do we want our military to be absent of all politics? Well, what I want is my military to do one thing: defend America and American interests. And when I say American interests, I mean life, liberty, and property of American citizens, not American foreign interests. When we let social contagions and DEI and all these different fads creep into the military becomes a political organization. It becomes divisive to those that want to just serve and defend. It becomes a social club. It becomes a TikTok fad. It becomes fodder for the social debate. And stripping that away and just focusing on fitness, readiness, lethality, what he'd say, breaking things and blowing things up, or whatever his line was, that's what the military is meant to be. And if we want our military to remain apolitical, it has to be universal across the board. I think having Pete there, closing his speech, dismissing the room would have been the proper ending, and I think America would have applauded. But you lowered the effectiveness in the room by letting President Trump, the commander-in-chief, come out and do what he does. He riffs. He's not going to follow a script. He's not going to do what is expected of the dignity of the office. He's going to go out there and do what Trump does. He is a reality TV star, and his instincts are to entertain. And that's what he did. And I think it decreased the efficacy by 50% at least.
Yeah, no, I agree with you, and I'm glad to hear you say that. Let's go to the constitutional stuff. One of the things that Trump did say was that he wanted to see our cities used as a military training ground. I mean, I got really nervous when I heard that. I'm like, hello, this is like absolute opposite of what our founders had envisioned, our military to be. And I don't know what to take from that. Do I take that here's Trump just bloviating as usual, or does he envision the U.S. military to be some Praetorian guard that is just he's going to be able to unleash every time he has a political issue with a blue state city or a blue city mayor? Brandon?
Well, it certainly is concerning, particularly if he's federalizing the Guard and moving it across state borders. That is certainly not, what the National Guard was initially intended to be. Yes, the Guard has always had a role in putting down, riots and local insurrections, of course, but usually they were at the command of the governor. But over the course of the 20th century, the National Guard was folded into the what's sometimes called Big Army, and is now almost indistinguishable from the Army Reserve and even the regular army. So yeah, I am concerned that this move to use it as an interstate auxiliary police force furthers that trend, and I'm sure Dan will comment on this as well, as it erodes the last bounds of the National Guard being a kind of militia that is tied to particular states and localities and is meant to serve those purposes. Like, if the president truly is concerned about lawlessness, he has plenty of law enforcement tools at his disposal. Yeah. I don't understand why the National Guard and now the regular military, most alarmingly, is being used to serve that function.
I mean, Dan, the whole focus of your group is to protect the National Guard from being used and abused by Washington. What are your thoughts, and what's Defend the Guard? Can you put that into perspective on how your group is actually dealing with these new developments, coming out of Washington?
Yeah, so our organization, we are the national sponsors of the Defend the Guard legislation, which effectively would give the states the authority to withhold their National Guard troops from being deployed into foreign wars that have not been properly declared by Congress. We believe that is a proper restraint, and the National Guard serves a threefold purpose under the Constitution, right? To repel an invasion, to put down an insurrection, and to enforce the laws of the Union. So I actually applaud. I'm going to be the oddball on the call here, and I apologize. I hope this doesn't offend anybody, but I truly believe that the National Guard defending their communities, even if they're crossing state borders, whether they're put on Title 10 federal orders or Title 32 state orders, whichever one, there's authority found in federal law and in the Constitution for both to exist. The key is this: as long as they are under the president's control under Title 10, they cannot do law enforcement, which means they can't engage American citizens. But what they can do is protect federal assets, federal buildings, property, protect federal law enforcement so they can do their job. And that's what the National Guard is actually out there doing. They're not kicking in the doors and raiding people at night and throwing them into ice vans. That's the story that's being spun on the media. But it's being spun that way because President Trump's messaging himself is so poor on this. We do not want our cities to become National Guard training grounds. Nobody wants that. And the fact that he's saying it, it just demonstrates once again that there should be somewhere in their organization a script writer that has the ear of the president. What we want is our National Guard to protect American lives, liberty, and property within the constraints of the law. That's what we want. There's no doubt that it's effective, that putting them on the streets of DC, in Memphis, Portland, LA during the Kings riots, all those things were done right. The National Guard wasn't sent there to arrest and zip tie people. They were there to protect the federal assets and hopefully maintain some sort of order so that federal law enforcement could do their jobs. So I believe that the National Guard is being used properly for securing the border, for securing our streets, and making neighborhoods and cities safe. And I would rather have my National Guard in Memphis, Tennessee, than dying in Tower 22 in Western Syria or fighting in the jungles of Central America chasing some drug smuggler. What's the better use of the National Guard? What's the proper use of the National Guard? It's defending Americans' lives, liberty, and property.
Now, let me ask you a quick question on that. What if there is a conflict between the governor of a state and the president, where the governor says there is no rioting, there is no lawlessness to the extent that we need this external intervention? We don't want to activate our own National Guard. I know this is, I guess, snaking through the courts right now. I know there was a case involving Los Angeles and the use of troops there, but at what point do we, question whether or not this guard is being used in a political fashion or is actually necessary in the ways that you outlined?
Absolutely. So it's so clearly delineated in federal law, but no one's going to take the time to read it. So I'll nerd out for a second here. In Title 10 of U.S. Code, it gives about 5 or 6 reasons why the National Guard can be federalized with congressional approval or presidential approval. One of them happens to be to fight overseas wars that are declared by Congress. That's actually in federal law already. One of them is also the president may activate the National Guard for emergency purposes for a specific period of time. And his authority is limited. You see these deployments, these activations are being capped at 60 days. That's actually part of Title 10. I think it's Section 12301, paragraph E, if anybody really wants to look it up. But there are limiting factors that the president can use them for. He is constrained by the law, and so if he does not release them back to the states when that time frame is up, he is in violation of law. But here's the problem: in order for laws to be effective, they have to mean something. In order for them to mean something, the civilian population that is bound by those laws has to care enough to do something about it. Yeah. And if we are just going to continue electing the same people to represent us in Congress who are going to give away their authority to be the most powerful branch of the federal government, the Congress, if we're going to keep sending those empty suits back there, we kind of get what we deserve. The American society needs to wake up. If we don't want National Guard in our streets, if we don't want crime-ridden communities, if we don't want bad foreign policy, it's up to us. We can come on podcasts and we can debate all we want. We can go to social clubs and talk about things. We can go to the local Republican Ronald Reagan dinner. None of it's going to matter until the population wakes up and understands that this is a republic. It is our authority that was given to us by a creator that we gave to the government to rule over us in a very limited capacity. Until we restore that, none of this is really anything more than debate club.
And you're talking my language. Absolutely. And I know we've run out of time, but I want to give Brandon the last word. Do you feel like the Constitution will win out in this regard? And it's not just on National Guard troops or whether or not they're being used for law enforcement at some point and the posse comitatus coming into play, or new activity in the Caribbean with the president using the military to go after cartels. How do you feel about the integrity and the veracity of our Constitution? Do you think that it will hold up? Or are you concerned that, we are in maybe, and I don't want to sound overwrought, nearing a constitutional crisis when it comes to some of these issues?
Well, I am a little pessimistic. Like historically, the courts have been very reluctant to intervene when it comes to presidential war powers, and so the natural ballast to that is Congress, and Congress so far has shown very little interest in these issues, even in the Caribbean. We've had some good statements from members of the House and the Senate, particularly some Democrats, but until Congress wants to get its power back, until Congress wants to reclaim its war powers, there's nothing really to stop the president. Particularly if one of the interesting things to me with the whole narco-terrorism thing is that in part the president was reelected and his supporters reelected him on this notion that we were tired of language being abused, right? Like we're tired of, but now. Narco-terrorists used to mean something, right? When Pablo Escobar blew up an airliner to kill someone, that was an act of narco-terrorism. But now it just means any simple drug pusher on the street. And people are kind of nodding along with this. I mean, large parts of his base, much to my dismay, support this action, even if they oppose some of the nonsense interventions abroad. So, I mean, until Congress steps up and takes back its war powers aggressively, I think we're going to be on this track for a while.
Absolutely, and that speaks to what that Dan just said about our elected officials using the authority that we have given them. Well, I hate to end on a pessimistic note, but I do think we need to be unvarnished here in what the stakes are. And I hope you both will come back on the show to talk about. I know we didn't get too much into the new AUMF proposal and some of the regime change nonsense that might be going on in the Americas, but I would love to have you both on to continue this conversation in the future.
We'll be on too.
Thank you.